is Ed McCarthy, CEO of Echelon Performance. Welcome back. My guest today is Todd Billingsley. The way I like to describe Todd is in a lot of different ways: friend, associate, leader, subject matter expert, CEO of Transforming Leaders Development Company, but somebody that I look to and I admire in terms of his depth and breadth, in terms of understanding the role of leaders and how to grow leaders in an organization. Todd, welcome back.
Thanks, Ed. Good to be here.
Great. Hey, the last episode we just finished, we finished talking on a subject that I think you have a really unique perspective on. It's the role of, I'll say, a manager, and the different dynamics that it takes to be successful. So what I would like you to do is go in depth in the three. And just to recap, it's leadership, coaching, and management. Those are sort of the three facets of it.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more about each, because what I'd like to also spend some time talking about is, we're talking about really growing a culture of leadership and development in an organization. Yeah. And we talked about having those brutal truth conversations, but also about measuring this. And how and where do you plant your flag in terms of measuring those different facets of the role?
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said before, I think, you've read a lot. Well, tend to read a lot of articles and a lot of studies. And then when you see all these things like your managers need to be coaches, right? Your managers need to be, and then they discuss the role of management, and it really morphs into kind of leadership skills and coaching skills. So I never understood just when people said, we're going to do management development. And what they do is they really teach people how to manage process, meaning, how do I performance management? What I do when I'm out in the field? Like, how do I manage expense reports, right? How do I look at compliance, right? Those are very important things. They should be taught and they should be framed in the manner which that company feels is most important. But that's just one aspect of their job. And if you're just a good manager and that's what you're focused on, and I've seen people just focus on like, hey, I'm basically going to manage KPIs.
Yeah.
And one, that doesn't drive engagement. That doesn't prepare somebody to be great in front of their customer or to provide a customer service that is in an elite level. That doesn't help them develop skills, behaviors, or develop the skills and behavior that keeps them relevant in a very changing marketplace. So I've seen that, and it doesn't usually work well. So I see a lot of companies who are focused on management development. So managing process and understanding that thing. Leadership, right, is where you really focus in on. Go ahead.
Let me just say, I could not agree more. And I think that there's a couple of things there. When it comes to management, the management of process, I like the way you said that. And I hate to say this, but that's sort of the lowest common denominator in terms of that role.
Yeah.
I'm putting you in there as a sort of a caretaker of that business. That's not the pathway to breakthrough performance or any of the things that we like to talk about. That's literally managing the business. And before you get into the next aspect of it, you say this a lot, and I think this is really powerful. And it's something that managers need to understand. And that is that if you see your role as the caretaker of that business and you're going to manage the metrics and the KPIs, there is technology that is available today that can replace you.
Oh, yeah, like that.
Fair to say?
And do it better, faster, more efficiently, more accurately.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say because caretaker to me means I'm caring for that business in a way that's going to leave it as good, if not better than for it. If you're just a manager, you're not a caretaker because you're not making anything better. You're just a bean counter. Nothing wrong with it. But what I mean by that, and no offense to accountants, because I've got some really good friends who are accountants, but you're not seeing around corners. You're not developing skills, behaviors. You're not looking at your business and approaching it in a different manner. You're just basically managing the daily activities of your people while not preparing them or preparing your business or preparing your business unit for the future. So you really are not even a caretaker in my assessment.
Yeah, that's that is an excellent refinement on that idea. So you're going to talk about leadership. Let's talk about the role of that person as a leader.
Yeah, so leadership is essential. It's probably I would say coaching and leadership are the hardest two things to do. Management is very easy, as you said. It's the lowest common denominator. It's the easiest thing to do that can be automated very quickly. And that's why it can be automated, because it is easy to do. Management, leadership, and coaching is not, right? A bot's not going to be able to do that. Now, I've seen some things where they've tried to do that, but the human connection is too much to overcome from that standpoint. And I think leaders set a vision, they co-create standards with their people, they drive engagement. And we know the data on engagement, that the more engaged you are, the more performance, the more innovation, the more psychological safety, the better that culture is. The better that culture is, the more performance they're going to drive. I've also, and then you look at coaching. Now, if you look at Daniel Goleman's work on leadership styles, he said coaching is the least used. And when asked why that is, they say, well, Ed, I don't have time to coach. And if you don't have time to coach, right, then you're missing one of the biggest components, probably the biggest component to preparing not only your organization, but your individuals for the future and to drive performance. Because if I'm not coaching and developing my people to be great at what they're at now and the skills and competencies they need for the future, then we're not going to compete at a very high level. Yeah. And we're not going to win on a consistent basis. You would never hear Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or any great coach say, yeah, they coach all the time. They're assessing their team's ability to execute, and then they're preparing them to execute based on their game plan and what they believe what good looks like. And that's the clarity they have around Saban and Kirby Smart, and these great coaches have a great mindset around what their process is, what they believe is important. There's clarity there. When there's clarity to what they believe good looks like, then it's easier to develop their players to execute the skills, behaviors, competencies that's most important for them to win.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest parts of that is they're honest, right? They'll look at somebody who has potential, and they'll bring them into the program, and they've done this for years and years and years. But what they're able to do is actually say, look, Todd, here's where I see you are today. I've watched your film. I've watched your practice. Here's where you are. If you're going to be, a starter, here's where you need to be. And if we're going to win a championship, this is where you need even harder. Yeah. That ability to really clarify the steps in that skill development that they're looking to execute.
Yeah, and they have to have that trust, right? That comes from trust. I mean, I go back to Kim Scott's work on radical candor, right? And people are like, oh, radical candor. But as she defines it, it's really caring for that person because they can be better. And if they're better, they're going to be able to take care of their family, and they're going to be able to take care of that job or get to that next level where they want to get. If I give you really good salient feedback because I care for you and I want you to be the best that you can be, and I want you to achieve things that you maybe not even believe you can achieve because you don't see it, but I see it, then that's really, to your point, why coaching matters. It's getting that person to where they're at, to some place they might not even believe they can get to. And those people who are open to that and don't have a fixed mindset around that are the ones who tend to, learn, lean in, and get better and really approach coaching from a different manner.
And I think another, we were talking about the draft in the last video. And the draft is you would think that people whose entire lives are dedicated to scouting and measuring talent, that the draft would be a lock, right? If you're a number one draft pick, that person's going to make an impact on your organization. Yeah. And it's just not, right? There are far more stories of duds than people that end up in the Hall of Fame from the first round. Yeah. And there really is no go-to way of measuring or predicting ability in the role. I'm going to turn that around to you, and I'm going to ask you, and I think you have a really interesting take on this. That's why I'm asking. But when you look at the tools that are out there and available to an organization, what are some of the ones that you think, when you think about managing, leading, and coaching, that really help an organization do better at identifying somebody who can thrive in that role?
Well, I think we first talked about what does good look like, and when somebody's doing it, what are the characteristics and competencies of that person when they're doing it. I think that's where the NFL draft is really fascinating because they really dig deep into, you look at things like PFF, which is pro football. They look at traits. And that's what James McGregor Burns said in his book, Transforming Leader. Characteristics and traits can quantify the characteristics and traits that will lead to higher performance. And that's what they're looking for. And I go back to this Gallup article, which says, why are great managers so so rare. Companies fail to choose the candidate with the right talent for the job 82% of the time. There's no excuse to that in my mind, because if the research tells us what the characteristics of a great leader are and what a great coach are, why don't we align those characteristics and hire for that type of talent and search for that talent? So there's things like the Hogan High Potential. There's assessments that have been used for a long time.
Yeah.
Hogan High Potential, right? Hogan HBRI, the MLQ, which is a transformational leadership assessment. There's things like emotional intelligence, which I think is very important. Then there's things that say that start to get into really measuring the capabilities and can they actually do it and can they see those things? And that's where I think technology like VR and AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, where I can put people in a scenario, right? And I can see how well they apply those coaching or leadership skills. Do they show emotional intelligence? Do they, from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, can I see their unconscious bias and can I help them get better around that? Because if I know it, then I can improve it. So I think augmented and virtual reality to me are the greatest measurement tools that we have, along with things like gamification. There's a small company out of Norway I worked with quite a bit called Atensi, which builds out some really fun but very immersive scenarios and games that you can, people use situational leadership or inside out growth coaching or emotional intelligence. I can put you in a gamified experience and I can ask you questions or put you in scenarios and start to see, can you apply these models when you're in front of a coaching situation or scenario? So that will start to tell me, like, are my programs being applied in these scenarios? How consistently are they applying them? And then how effectively are they measuring? We use things like Kirkpatrick, and I don't think there's anything wrong with Kirkpatrick. They can actually be put in these tools. But now with technology, and then I think about what your company does, the amount of work you do looking at, one, you built a criteria called Basics, which I think really helps frame coaching quality from a written standpoint, but I think it can also be used in any type of coaching. Provides a criteria that's easily used to look at the standard of coaching within an organization from a quality standpoint, from a written standpoint, and then really start to assess how well our coaches are providing written feedback. Because if success leaves clues, then what we would think that if you're really good at written feedback, then you probably should be good at providing good verbal feedback. And the best coaches that we've seen, both at BI and Biohaven, where I was at prior to this, was that the best coaches who could not only write it but articulate it, their teams were performing at a much higher level.
The statistic you used before was that they 48% higher,
right?
And that's really, really powerful. And you're touching on something, and I'm going to just share this thought, and then we'll get into one last discussion. But when you look at the basics, right? So the basics is our criteria for coaching quality, which is one aspect of effective coaching, right? That measurable, sustainable impact on growth in the business.
Yeah.
And starting the company 17 years ago, we didn't start with basics, right? It was a lot of trial and error. We had some clunkers in there, things that didn't end up really impacting performance. And why we have stuck with, and the basics has become what it is to us and to clients, is because it is tied to performance, right? The presence of those criteria in coaching, verbal and otherwise, is really a direct.
Sorry about that.
I love
Kenny Chesney, man. Kenny Chesney had to come on. Sorry, brother. We have to do that over again.
I did not invite Kenny Chesney. I don't know about you, but I didn't invite him.
That's my golfing partner, Tom. Yeah. Sorry, my man.
Anywho, no worries. And I'm not editing that out either. That's
okay.
Is because what we're talking about, leadership, coaching, that all has to add up to something.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to go ahead.
I've been fascinated when people, when people don't focus on coaching, or they kind of go like, you know what, our coaching is good. Well, compared to what? What's the criteria you're using? What are the skills and behaviors you're measuring to say that your coaching is good? Number one, if as sports fans, right? And there's a lot of people, even if you don't like sports, but you love music and you went to you paid money to see somebody perform and they didn't perform at their highest, you would say immediately they weren't prepared, right? They weren't prepared. That's the mindset of why great coaches matter, because they're consistently preparing their people to execute at a higher level, and they understand the standard that it takes to be great. And you can easily see that. Like, unfortunately, I'm a Chelsea fan. Chelsea's had really a good run of it for the last 30 years, but lately the standard on the field isn't good. And you can assess that in many different ways. But I think from one standpoint is that they don't have a clear direction and goal of how they want to play. And without that clear direction of how they want to play, it's tough for their players to execute that game plan. Definitely. And then they're not prepared to execute or play that game fully engaged because they don't have the clarity of what they're supposed to do, why they're supposed to do it, and how they're supposed to do it. Even though they're great professionals, and you can put these guys on any team, they'd probably do better because they understood the game plan and the focus. It's just amazing that we can look at people and go, they're not prepared to play. It's the coach's problem. He needs to get better, or the talent has to improve. I mean, it's the same thing within corporate America or whatever role you're in. Coaches matter because they help develop the skills, behaviors, engagement, quality, service that is provided by the organization. And if you're not seeing a high level of that performance take place, then it's a two-part thing. It's who are you hiring? Do you know what good looks like? Who are your coaches? And do you know what they're doing well? And are they great coaches? It's easy to assess those two things. It's just that we rarely do that.
Yeah. And I'm going to just wrap it up on this, and then we'll come back for another round of this. But, you look at Chelsea as a storied football club, right, in the Premier League, but 10 wins in 33 matches this year. No,
they scored 2 goals in their last 10 games. I mean, it's rough, brother.
Shocking. Well, I'll let you dwell on that, and then we'll come back and talk more. My guest today is Todd Billingsley. Todd is CEO of Transforming Leaders Development Company, a longtime thought leader and actual leader within the life sciences industry, and just a really good dude. So, Todd, come back for another round.
Sounds good, man.
All right.